Winsome Resources is advancing 4 hard rock lithium assets in Quebec, and the company recently released some significant drilling results. Joining us for more is Managing Director Chris Evans. Thanks for being with us, Chris.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you talk about a trifecta of factors, success factors for the company. The fact that you're lithium focused, you're in Quebec, you are on the Australian Stock Exchange. You think there's an advantage there. And also, you are still pre-resource. A lot of lithium companies can't say that. So can you expand on those 3 things?
Yes, I certainly can. And I think they're all success factors, and the 3 of them combine to make us a great potential. And I think they actually make us unique. There's numerous other companies that have a couple of those success factors, but I don't think anyone at the moment has all 3. So the first one, being focused on lithium, I think is relatively obvious in the fantastic market we're in at the moment for lithium. Year-on-year demand is predicted to increase. Pricing is at an all-time high. And really, although there's going to be bumps in the road, no doubt, like there is for any commodity, I think there's going to be a general trend upwards for lithium demand over the next decade at least. So that sets us in a great position. And right from our IPO last year, we've been solely focused on lithium, and we remain that way. So I think that gives investors some comfort that we're not diverting our attention into other commodities as well. Our sole focus, which is where our experience lies, is on lithium. The second success factor is the ASX listing, as you said, but we're not in Western Australia. We're focused on Quebec entirely at the moment. And what I mean by that is when we listed on the ASX in November last year, we aimed to raise $18 million, and we were offered well over $80 million, which is a great position to be in. We had to cut a lot of people back, and it left investors hungry, I think. But what that was an indication that I think for various reasons, Australian investors will offer a bit more support, certainly at the moment, than, say, if we were listed on the TSX. And one of the reasons I think that is because Canada hasn't yet had a successful lithium story. With Nemaska and North American Lithium, they are actually, there's failures that everyone sees.
Right.
And so perhaps Canadian investors are a little bit reticent to invest yet, the way Australian investors are. So with that big support behind us, that plus $80 million we were actually offered, a lot of that's still sitting in the background for the right, as we expand, as we grow, as we need more money in the future, all that's still there, and that's very comforting, I think. And of course, there are other companies with those 2 success factors as well. But the third one is that we are pre-resource. And what I mean by that is that we don't yet have a JORC or NI 43-101 formal resource on our books. And as a result of that, our share price hasn't popped yet. It hasn't seen the big appreciation since IPO that some of our peers have seen. So that gives a big potential for investors still at this point. And there are many other, well, several other companies with the first 2 success factors, but they're, rather than being pre-resource, they're very early stage greenfield. So they're in the right area, but there's no evidence of real lithium. Whereas we know lithium's there. We've done quite an amount of drilling already. It's just proving up how large it is. So I think they're those 3 success factors which position us uniquely in the market and make us a great, for investors, a great opportunity to see appreciation in the next 6 to 12 months.
Now, speaking of drilling, you hit on some pegmatite at your Adena mine, and that's near your Jafar deposit. It's probably too early to say, but is there any evidence that those 2 are connected? And if they are, what could that signify?
Yes, I mean, we were really impressed with those drill results that we released last week. We actually, at Adina, the previous drilling that was done in 2018 is at what we're calling the main Adena deposit. And the Jamar deposit, or the Jamar outcrop, I should say, is what we discovered a couple of months ago on our summer field campaign. And that's about 1.2 kilometres to the northeast of the previous drilling area. We got great rock chip samples from the surface, so we decided to start drilling there at the Jamar. And that's where we got these great intersections. So the pegmatite we encountered and released last week is about 1.2 kilometres from the other pegmatites that were found in the previous drilling campaign in 2018. It's very hard to say at this point whether they are connected. We're doing some geophysical surveys, a gravity survey in between, to determine whether it looks like there's pegmatite there, but the only way to tell is to put some holes in between the ground, and we're certainly going to do that. At the moment, while we're hitting great pegmatites on Jamar, we're going to stay there for the moment, and then we'll slowly push back on the gap in between Jamar and the old deposit, and then start infill drilling on the previously discovered mineralised area. So it's a really exciting time ahead in the coming 6 to 9 months at Adena.
For sure. Now, your flagship is Cancet. Now, you've talked about huge outcrops, huge spodumene crystals. It's high grade, 20 drill targets. So what's the latest on that?
That Cancet certainly, up until now, and I think it probably still is our flagship, although Adina with these intersections is becoming equally as interesting, I'd say. But at Cancet, we spent the summer identifying drill targets. After having done geophysical surveys, we sent teams in the field, and they discovered around 20 pegmatite outcrops across our 395 claims that we have at Cancet. Now, we don't know whether these are mineralised yet, but the best way to tell whether they are is, in our view, to do exactly what we're doing, which is land an RC, reverse circulation drill rig, on each outcrop, drill 2 or 3 holes and determine how thick the pegmatite is and whether it's mineralised. And an RC rig is quicker to drill than a core diamond or core rig, which is typically used in Canada, which does give more information on the structural makeup of the ore body. But an RC rig produces chips. You can see whether you're in pegmatite, and you can test the mineralisation. So of those 20 targets, we've drilled about 3 to 4 of them so far, a couple of thousand metres of drilling. That RC rig will be on at Cancet until December time. And then after that, we will bring 1 or 2 diamond or core rigs in. They'll be ground-based, and they'll be doing 2 things. One is infill drilling the known outcropping mineralised ore body at Cancet. And the second one is investigating any of those outcrops that warrant further drilling based on the results we see from the RC. So we've got a good 9 months at least of drilling ahead of us at Cancet.
Right. So you're planning to continue drilling at Cancet well into 23. The same thing for Adina. But you're also looking to bring out Maiden Resources for both of them sometime in the middle of the year. Do you have any sense, any idea how big the resource might be? And if it is of a fair size, could you see, do you expect the stock to get re-rated? Would that be a trigger for that?
I think it really is. That's going to be the trigger for us. I suppose there's a couple of triggers. One is having drill bits in the ground like we do now, and I think we've seen that in the last week. Our share price has done relatively well when investors start to see that we're really at that pointy end of exploration, where we've done all the hard work over the last 12 months to identify targets, and now we're drilling to prove up those targets.
Right. Not to interrupt, but your stock popped, as you know, nearly 30% on that news.
Yeah, it did. We were up 50% yesterday, which was pretty exciting for us.
Even better.
Yeah, that's right. For us, it's unsurprising. We considered our market cap to be way too low compared to peers, and given the assets we've got, and this is a re-rating. It's happened relatively quickly, but I think it'll continue to happen as we put out good results. But going back to the Maiden Resources, of course, it's very hard to predict what I think those would be. But at Cancet, given that we can see outcropping, and we've done about 5,000 to 6,000 metres of diamond drilling already, we've got an idea what's in the ground on the area we've drilled, and we could probably put out a resource now if we thought it was large enough. We haven't gone through that motion. But to me, we'd want to put out a maiden resource that's of a reasonable size that you could base a preliminary economic analysis upon. So at Cancet, that's probably somewhere near 10 million tonnes at greater than 1% lithium oxide. and I'd hope that Adina would be about the same. Putting out a smaller resource would perhaps disappoint the market, given the size of our land holdings and the work we've done. So we'll see how it develops, but I wouldn't anticipate putting out a very small resource.
All right, investors like to hear that. Now you're sitting on about 12 million Australian dollars of cash as of the end of September. You've talked about the possibility of strategic acquisitions at some point. How likely is that, and would the time frame likely be after, if you do anything like that, after the Maiden Resources come out?
I think it's, as you know, Canada's a huge place, and there's been a lot of historical exploration work done that wasn't necessarily focused on lithium. And all that exploration data is available. And what we're discovering, in many cases, there's lithium being discovered, but in the past it's been hasn't been the resource that they've been looking for. So the information's been set aside. So we're looking through that information to try and find likely areas of lithium mineralisation around Canada. And there are quite a few projects which we're aware of that sit on the TSX and perhaps haven't would benefit from exposure to the ASX for the reasons I talked about before. So we're actively looking. I don't think the time would be necessarily after a maiden resource. We believe that if we find the right asset, we'd want to move on it as soon as possible, so that for us to wait, say, 6 months or 9 months for a maiden resource, just so our share price is up, I don't think makes sense. If we believe in the acquisition, then we'd do it as soon as possible and start to move forward with it, much the way we have with our current assets. So it's certainly part of our work stream that we're looking at all the time.
Now, you say that you're going to have an OTCQB listing sometime in the next few weeks. You've also talked about the possibility of a listing on the TSX Venture Exchange, and that may occur during a big money event, as you call it, let's say construction down the road. What would be the timeline, and what do you think it would do for the company in terms of getting more Canadian exposure and a listing here?
I think the OTCQB listing will be very important for us, and it's been quite frustrating that we haven't had that sooner, but they've got their processes to go through. And I think because when the time I've spent in Canada, I've heard quite a number of people say that they have trouble buying ASX stock. And sure, brokers and larger institutions have mechanisms to do it. But I think smaller institutions and retail investors really struggle. So I think that'll increase our liquidity a fair bit, and it'll increase our exposure in North America. So we're very much looking forward to that when it occurs in the next couple of weeks. The TSXV, that's a funny one because, again, for the reasons I talked about at the beginning of this interview, the TSX at the moment I don't think gives the support that the ASX does. So arguably, there's not too much advantage right now for us to list. And it's, of course, an administrative and a cost burden. But in the future, as we start to build up our following in North America and our investment through the OTCQB, I think the TSXV listing makes sense. And the timeline on that's probably, I think it would make sense to do along with our project development timeline. So maiden resource by mid next year. And then 12 months after that, we upgrade the resource with a pre-feasibility study. A year after that, there's a definitive feasibility study and a further upgraded resource, and then a final investment decision. And that's about the time I would see would make sense. But of course, markets change, circumstances change, so it could easily be before that if it was warranted.
Right, and maybe by then Canadian investors have caught up to Australian investors in terms of lithium plays, because as you've noted, a lot of Australian investors have made money so far on lithium companies, whereas Canadian investors have been burned to a degree by the Nemaskas of the world. Now, Chris, just last question here for you. You've touched on a few of them here, but you say there are pretty well 4 main catalysts investors should be looking out for heading into 23 for Winsome Resources. What are they?
I think the first catalyst is going to be well, more drilling for us. And we've already seen that so far, that the drilling in the ground brings value to the company because it's proving up our resources. So more drill rigs on the ground is going to be the first catalyst. I think the second one, and I've talked about these before, I can't remember whether I'm saying the exact same things, but I think these are important catalysts nonetheless. Maiden Resource on each of our projects is going to be probably the biggest catalyst, of course, facilitated by that drilling. Almost coincident with those, with the Maiden Resources, will be a PEA, preliminary economic analysis, or a scoping study, because all the ingredients are there for that. We know our infrastructure. We'll have the Maiden Resource. Power's there. We've done our environmental surveys. We've done metallurgical test work. And that'll prove to the market that not only are we building up a resource, and not just for the sake of it, we're working towards project development and producing lithium. So that's probably the third catalyst. And I think the fourth one will be a acquisition that we talk about, or some sort of significant corporate activity. Because, of course, the other side of us acquiring someone is strategic interest we get into Winsome. And I'm not saying being purchased, but I'm saying there's lots of people around who want lithium in the future and are prepared to enter into strategic alliances and or pay for offtake. Now, I'm not saying we would give away offtake at this early stage, but I think people recognise the expertise we have in developing lithium mines, and we're a very attractive partner for many end users of lithium around the world. So I think that sort of goes hand in hand with an acquisition. It could work the other way.
All right, lots to look forward to. Chris, thanks for your time today. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, Chris Evans, Managing Director at Winsome Resources. Our thanks to him, and thanks to you for watching. We'll see you next time.